before I get started with everything, I'd like to walk you guys through obviously the purpose of having these masterclasses in the first place. So not only for NL English Academy students, but I do think it's quite important to keep the wider community of parents quite well informed with a few things. So it's covering obviously a couple updates, but to obviously have some resources that are available for everyone. So it's good to see everyone that's coming in here today. So a little bit about me. So my name is Nelson Luo, and I am the founder and principal of NL English Academy. So I am an alumni of North Sydney Boys High School many, many years ago, actually now, but I'm a very, very proud alumni of North Sydney Boys. And a few years ago, a bit about me after high school. After high school, many years ago now, I received a UNSW co-op scholarship. So I was one of 6 graduates chosen across Australia and New Zealand to receive one of these scholarships. And currently, obviously being the founder and principal of NL English Academy, I do mentor hundreds of Australian students, not only in New South Wales, but in other states, and actually some not only in Australia as well. So we've got a few that are not even in Australia, but overseas in Southeast Asia, who I'm very proud of as well. As well as I am a coach just sort of on the side for university scholarship applicants. And these are mainly North Sydney Boys students who are aiming for cadetships or other types of scholarships or sort of things like that. So that's a very brief overview about me. Getting back into the schedule. So we will have a bit of an introduction of myself. Obviously, that's myself already, but NL English Academy. Ravi, the session is recorded. So I will upload this to the Facebook groups and to share to the parents after. If you would like to love the content again, I happily welcome everybody to. No problems at all, Ravi. Yeah, I'll get into a bit of an intro about NL English Academy and who we are. But essentially, you'll be learning some of these strategies that we teach NL English Academy students to obviously secure the obviously top results and selective school offers from our students. But as you may or may not already know, we're not just limited to selective and OC, but high school as well. So who are we? So NL English Academy is Australia's leading OC, selective and high school English tutoring specialists. I'm very proud of the whole NL English Academy team and obviously what we're doing. And a brief overview of what we offer to parents and to obviously the students that are with us at NL English Academy is personalized and accelerated online English programs. In our small class sizes, maximum 6 students a class, 98 ATAR top selective mentors under my personal guidance, and a strong focus on individual student tracking, personalized attention, and obviously leading to leading student success rates. Recently, I'm actually quite proud to announce that we have been featured in the Australian Business Journal. A bit about the exam summary and just an update for everybody to recognize is that English is obviously worth 50% of your final selective test mark. A bit about the exam summary is obviously you may or may not have heard that the reading exam has actually quietly added an extra question section. So it's for the selective, it's question 9. For the OC, it's question 7. But it's a very similar question style that I would obviously like to inform everyone and run through for today. Before I jump into that, actually, English is, again, worth 50% of your selective tests, your final selective test mark. But with the whole selective test, you've got obviously your reading exam, your mathematical reasoning, thinking skills, and your writing tests. So if you see on the screen, I'm not sure if you can see, I think you might be able to see my annotation on the screen, that the reading exam used to be 40 minutes. Now it's 45. So if you see this directly sourced from the government website, it's now 45 minutes. And as opposed to 16 questions slash sections, because some questions have multiple questions. They've quietly added one more, but each section is weighted 25% total. Students, when they obviously go for next year or the years after, they choose currently between 3 exam slots. So it's 3 separate days, and obviously they will only need to sit one of the days to obviously have each of those. So Raj will have questions at the very end, but hang on to your question for the time being. Yeah, all students will sit exams on one of these 3 days. And obviously, starting from this year's selective, we have shift to a computer-based format, and they are obviously provided at the testing center. So writing will obviously be typed on the keyboard, but there will be paper, obviously, for working out. So I'll run through, especially for the writing section, I will run through some few exam technique details there that I think are very important for parents to recognize. And with the section weighting change prior to 2025, thinking skills previously was worth 35% and writing previously was worth 15%, but from 2025 onwards and towards the presumable future, that they are now all worth 25% each. So yeah, that's a little bit about the exam summary. And again, if anybody has any questions, I do invite you to stick around to the Q&A at the very end. Hang on to your question and I will answer them all for you. Moving on to reading and writing. So jumping into a couple of reading and writing strategies, I will start first with writing. So I know the reading exams first and the writing exams at the very end, but I will start with writing because reading will get through a few different sections within the actual reading exam. So we'll cover writing first. So in the writing exam, it's one open response covered in 30 minutes and it's typed on the screen as you would have seen on this panel here. And before I actually jump into a few notes on exam technique and whatnot, the biggest tip that I've seen not only in NL English Academy students, but obviously parents and students who I mentor is I've seen when we talk about exam technique, yes, you have your approach, which I will get into with the exam technique here. Yes, we have our approach, but something quite interesting that I think parents must also recognize to best prepare your child for the computer-based style exams is touch typing. So I know before the 2025 selective test, I hypothesized that students who are above average or above average but have essentially perfect touch typing skills will still perform very, very well and near the top 10% band. And speaking to a few parents or parents reaching out to me after the exam about their performance in the selective, it became quite evident that touch typing was a key differentiator and will still be, in my opinion, a key differentiator for obviously providing a response with speed and accuracy under timed conditions. The reason for this, it's you can imagine if you have 2 students, one student is finger typing on the keyboards, getting letters in at a time, as compared to a student who is fluent at touch typing. And with that same comparison, students who are touch typing versus those touch typing accurately versus those who can touch type moderately well but make a couple of mistakes and have to go back and fix them, you can imagine how many small small minutes that'll cost them during the time condition exam, especially how vocabulary is assessed during the exam, needing to go back and fix them, not because you don't know the spelling, but because the typing didn't, the level of typing skills didn't meet the level of your own personal ability. That's one thing I really want to stress to everybody. And one thing I would like to suggest, this is a free resource that it's not affiliated with NL English Academy at all. It's called Monkey Type. I actually got the suggestion from some parents actually from NL English Academy, and they informed me about Monkey Type, and I thought it'd be good to share with everybody as well. It's essentially a website that you can just practice typing, and it's in my opinion, it's helped me personally improve my typing skills as well. So I'm sure it would help other students as well. So that's my biggest tip here first. Now, jumping into exam technique, the very first thing to recognize is that it's an open response. And obviously, with different writing styles, it's first essential that you recognize exactly what is the purpose of the piece that you're being asked. So you must recognize the requirements of the question, because without addressing the requirements or what's required from the question and finding the respective writing type to answer the question with, your answer won't be, obviously accurate towards the question, because one of the biggest things, markers look for is whether you've actually answered the question or not. That's firstly the most important thing, and that comes with your planning time. So obviously with your structured planning time, I'll get into how to actually structure your planning time in maximum 3 minutes. But within those 3 minutes, the first thing when you look at the page is try to find what the purpose is. See, is it a creative? Is it a persuasive? Is it a discussion, or is it an informative type? So with a creative, they might ask you for a creative outright, or they might ask you for an opening or a narrative or a recount, and those things all fit under creative. They might ask you for a persuasive, and that could be in the form or in the skin of a speech, or it can be a debate or anything like that. A discussion can be in the form of anything else that's balancing two sides. But informative especially, and for the NL English Academy students that are watching this right now, you would be pretty familiar with term 1 creative, term 2 persuasive, term 3 discussion, and term 4 informative. So what you're doing right now with informative writing, covering a multitude of different informative writing styles. Thinking of it like informative writing is the umbrella, but using the same macro structure and microstructure and stylistic techniques to apply to reports or research articles, newspaper. Same structure, same writing style, but in a different skin. So it's first very important to identify that. Identify exactly what the purpose of your piece is. Is it to inform? Is it to persuade? Is it to explore something creatively through a narrative, or is it to discuss? Because one of the biggest traps that I've seen very capable students fall into is they would rush through the writing and planning time. Obviously, there is time pressure, but just because there's time pressure doesn't mean we have to skip the start of ensuring we know what we're actually doing before we write. Because if we misread the prompt itself, it's as easy as it sounds. If we misread the prompt itself, and if it's asking for something that's a speech or a persuasive or something like that, and we write a creative, then our response won't be applicable to the question. So that's the first thing to address. And throughout your writing, obviously when you're planning, at the back of your mind, this is a bit of a personal tip from me. So actually many years ago from HSC as well, one thing that I kept in mind all the time when it came to planning is you should have in your mind sort of like an indicator or like signposting in a way. At which point in time of the exam should you be where? So for example, introductions, 4 or 5 minutes. So then therefore when there's 25, 26, so including planning time, when there's 26, 25, 24 minutes, approximately around there, when it's at that time on the clock, maybe keeping in your mind that, okay, I should be done with my intro or almost done. And in your planning time, you should mark those in your mind. So if you've got 3 body paragraphs, think about how many minutes are per body paragraph. So maybe 7 to 8, depending on your allocation, and then marking that to how many minutes are left. So that ensures that you can actually, if you have that in your planning time, just in your mind, what that does for you is you can structure your time checks. So at certain points of time, when you finish your intro or you finish your body paragraph 1, you can check up and see how much time there is. But you would have already known if you're, ahead or behind track because you've already planned that in your mind in the first place. So that's it's a pretty neat tip that I've used actually for the HSC. And obviously with the HSC, you've got, essentially for English, you've got three essays in one exam, and there's a lot more to the time checks because there's so many essays and so many parts of the essay. But obviously for the selective, I would definitely recommend this for the one open response piece. And the fourth point that I wanted to implore is you must check over your work purposefully, not passively. And you probably see me smiling because I see this a lot in students, and it's actually one of the most common things that I've seen, not only for my students, but for the rest of English Academy during exams, students, and for parents, you might see this within your child as well, that if they have 5 minutes left, then they feel seemingly confident. They feel seemingly confident that they've done it perfectly the first time round. And with the 5 minutes, that they think to just read through it and just read through it, right? But I want you to, especially for the students here and for parents, this is the advice that I would give to your kids, is when checking over your work, do not read it as if you're reading it for leisure or just reading through it. Read it purposefully, and you should imagine yourself as your biggest critic. To me, it's like a cognitive bias where when we write something, because we've already written it ourselves, we think we should be less careful or less critical in many ways. And I find that to be a natural instinct, even for myself as well. So it's something I have to catch myself with as well if I'm writing. But I would like to make it clear that it's so important, especially in the actual exam. Don't waste the last few minutes just reading your writing. You must go through it as if you're the strictest teacher you've ever had. You have to nitpick every single thing, even the wording. If there's any spelling, the commas, look for all the small things, because these are all the small things where you can lose marks really easily. So you want to pick up on these low-hanging fruits. It's usually that, through really critically looking through your work and seeing, what's actually wrong with it. In the back of your mind, you want to go from actually a pessimistic standpoint. That's actually the best way, in my opinion. Although I wouldn't consider myself a pessimist, I would say that it's the best thing to do, though, to be the biggest critic, or in a way, a pessimist towards your own writing, to actually screen or look through that lens and see, what is there to pick out. So that's a big piece of advice from me, because it's oftentimes it doesn't reflect the ability of the student when it comes to these. It's say exam technique, right? It's ability aside, a lot of this is ensuring that we have the right approach, and we have obviously the most effective approach to head into an open response question. And say, for example, checking over your work in a purposeful and critical way. That's an easy way to pick up on maybe potential lost marks, right? And sort of picking those out and untying the knots. So it doesn't require you to be inherently skillful. It just requires care. It requires, a bit of patience too. And that's in my opinion, it's a low-hanging fruit that I think everyone must sort of be aware of and to keep in mind. So that's for writing. So if anyone has any questions, maybe note it down for yourself or just keep it in your back of your mind, and I will open up the Q&A at the end of today. So moving on to the reading exam. So previously it was 16 questions with essentially 30 marks total, with 8 marks for your dual extract MCQs, 6 for your poems, and 6 for your closed passages or summary statements, and 10 for your choose the extracts. But quietly, if you check the Department of Education website and exams with the online practice exams, there's an extra one here. So very similar to closed passages, but I wanted to sort of differentiate the names a bit. So I'll call it word choice just to make it evident which one we're looking at. But throughout this exam, 17 questions, it's called 17 questions, but question 9, question 16, and question 17 have multiple marks. So it's in actuality, it's a 38 mark exam in 45 minutes. But specific sections are called questions to have multiple marks with the online format. So I must implore that different exam techniques must be used depending on the exam section. For the NL English Academy students who are watching this right now, who I see actually a couple of us that are here today, we are integrating word choice in week 8 and week 9 for the course content. So we're changing that now to include that and obviously get ahead of the curve, because obviously not many students are actually aware that there is a new change and it's not formally announced. So we're changing this for week 8 and week 9, and our week 10 end of term exams will be changed to adapt as well from this very term. So we're doing this in live time. And I want to implore that, obviously, for those students, you would have seen going through theory for exam technique for different reading questions, there is a different exam technique for different sections. And from an overall standpoint for everyone here today, obviously different sections require different exam technique because there's a different purpose behind what's required, or what's the skill that they're looking for within students for each section. So a very, very simple example for me to obviously elaborate on this is poems versus choose the extract. In poems, you have 6 marks, but for poems, to analyze a poem will always be more difficult than the 4 extracts in the choose the extract section. Although there's 10 marks in choose the extracts, students should spend less time per mark on the choose the extract section as opposed to poems, because the level of depth and analysis required to fully tear apart a poem, get to the core of the poem, understand the inferred meaning, symbolism, metaphors, etc. It requires more time than scanning and choose the extract or even closed passage and summary statement style questions. So that's a very, very, very simple example, but I'll jump through each section. I'll jump through each section shortly, especially with the word choice section. That's obviously new for everybody, students, parents included. I'll run through what I think is the most optimal way for that. Yeah, this is a bit of an overview. And again, I will share these slides to the parents in the discussion groups after this masterclass. So moving on to reading part 1, dual extract MCQ comprehension. So obviously with the online testing format, switching between the extracts, selecting your answers here, going back, flagging your answer to come back to, moving on to the next question. The most important thing, so considering the reading aspect as well, because with this section, it's not as in-depth as poems. So in terms of getting to the core, or there's symbolism and inferred meaning that's trying to throw you off, it's not as complicated as poems, but it's also not as simple as closed passages because they're mostly informatives, or choose the extracts where they are just 4 short extracts where you're scanning. So in let's say the hierarchy of analysis, poems up here, closed passages and choose the extracts around here, these first few comprehension extracts I would say sit around here. So below poems but above scanning. So it requires elements of both scanning but also picking out the key ideas, keeping those key ideas in the back of your mind, connecting those key ideas or keywords to question stems. Especially when I say question stems is with these questions, say for this question, for example, writer suggests by hats were removed without further comment. If you go through these extracts, as you first start and read through and obviously go through these extracts, not entirely deeply, but not entirely just skimming them. It's a middle ground between both, and for every student, it's a different pace. By the time you get through both extracts, and keeping in mind the key idea of each extract and keywords, you should be able to relate some part of that from one of the extracts to the stems or one of the key ideas of the question. So thinking of the question and thinking of the text as connecting key ideas. That's how you want to think about it. Obviously, using the process of elimination throughout these 4, but before you go through that, before you look at the 4 responses, try to actually think about what would the most, without looking at the 4, answer responses first. When you read the question, try to think about what the answer would be. Then a sort of process or like mental mapping process would be seeing those questions. So seeing the question in your mind, trying to identify what could possibly be that answer, and then seeing which option out of the 4 links closest to what you had in your mind, right? And that makes sure that you think of the question from what you think, as opposed to what you're given with the four obviously answer boxes. Because remember, they will sometimes try to trick you with these 4 responses as well. So try to think of the answer with a clean palette and then see what connects best out of the 4. As I mentioned, using the process of elimination. And stylistic features, structure, language, and comparative analysis. So these are a few things that I would keep in mind as you go through the pieces. Stylistic features being, if there's a metaphor, if there's symbolism, if there's a technique, if there's anaphora, if there's anything like that. Structure, seeing why it's structured in a certain way, how it's structured. These are often indications of the flow of the piece. Language and comparative analysis. So with extract A and extract B, sort of seeing what's the common ground, right? What's the common ground between both of them, and obviously what is different about them. They're obviously going to be different, but oftentimes it's a key theme. For example, it could be family, it could be love, it could be memory. These are some key ideas / human experiences that could be overlapping between the 2 extracts. So that's just something to keep in mind when approaching this section. Moving on, obviously, if anyone has any questions on this section in particular, again, note it down, let me know at the end for the Q&A. And new reading part 2, word choice questions, 8 out of the 38 marks. So for this, let's just see this example. So if you haven't seen this just yet, because it's quite a recent thing, if you haven't seen this yet, I would implore you to, keep your eyes peeled for this. You'll see a very short paragraph or text, only a few sentences long, not very long at all, where there's, if you see my mouse, there's a few section drop downs, very similar to closed passages where you have a gap, but in this case, it's a singular word, right? So seeing which word fits best within the context of this singular sentence. So it's a little bit small to see, but we have the sentence starting here, but it's only one sentence. And it's seeing throughout the flow of from here to here, which word connects best. The approach is very similar to closed passages, understanding the flow, but there's an extra element of assessing vocabulary. So it's not only if you understand the definition of certain words, but understanding where do these words fit in context. So obviously for NL English Academy students, if you're, obviously for the ones that are here listening in, this is, for example, your words of the week, for example, ensuring those are revised. And also for not only NL English Academy parents and students, but for the wider community of parents with our free resource bank. If you're aware, NL English Academy has a free resource bank on our website. And on that, if you scroll down, there's different sections for different exam styles. But under the selective test subheader, we have about 8 vocab lists, each of them are 50 words each. And yes, vocabulary lists are useful, and understanding vocabulary is is good. Even for example, even a dictionary, you can find vocabulary wherever. But the most important thing, aside from just memorization, is understanding vocab in the right context. Because if you only understand word and definition, it's very hard to say approach this question, because it'll rely on you knowing where to put the word in the right context. But in addition to that, it's also connected to your writing section. If you want to use writing, or stronger vocabulary, or a variety of different words in your writing, you must know where they fit. You must know the context of where they fit before you jump into just using them. Yep, I'll get to your question at the very end in the Q&A. And just hang on to your question for now, and we'll get onto it in the Q&A. So what I would first do is to scan the text and understand the context. So especially the tone and the main idea, because oftentimes tone informs what context words should be used in. So scan the text and understand the context, tone, the main idea of the flow, what's the scene, what they're talking about. And for each answer option, determine the word type required. So if it's a noun, or verb, adjective, etc. For this one, they're all nouns. They're all nouns, so it makes it easy for you. But very similar to closed passages, determine the flow of the text before and after each word gap to naturally find the word that would logically connect. A mental model that I would like to suggest is, and obviously when I was looking at this, and when I was thinking of what would be the best way to approach this, is understanding if these four, it's very similar to the first section. It's if these four answer options weren't there, what would be a word or the meaning of a word or words that would need to be in that gap to ensure that the sentence flows, right? So that's understanding the flow of the text is very important. It's like water in a pipe. You've got a pipe. That's a sentence. You've got a pipe, and this gap in this word choice question, there's a cross section, and someone's cut the pipe, right? You're trying to find what's the word that can best fit that extra section of the pipe back in. If it's slightly inaccurate in a wrong context, think of that as it's the circumference of the pipe is too big and it's still leaking out. And in a way, it's like leaking out meaning. It's keeping that flow of the sentence fluid, ensuring that when you read it, it actually makes sense. So I would also suggest a tip for this tip just right here, that if you are stuck, read out the words under your breath. So try to read out the sentence and see which one verbally flows. And for this, instinctually, you could be able to, this is at a last resort, instinctually, you could be able to find obviously which one would fit in best, but that's after approaching this. That's if you're stuck. Then reading out the words could be something that might help. So sounding it out and thinking to yourself, does this actually make sense? Does this sentence sound right? And using your sort of instincts to determine that. So that is my suggestion. And for this, aim for under a minute for each gap. And in this section, I would, obviously we haven't done any end of term exams yet for NL English Academy students, or it wasn't in the previous, say, selective. But my hypothesis is that I'm saying here to aim under a minute for each gap, but my hypothesis is that students could even take less time for this. If they understand the words in the right context, they could smash it out. Because it doesn't, oftentimes the time taken for these, for this exam is usually oftentimes in the first section or the poem section, which I'm going to jump into next, where we have to really dive into the deeper meaning. So that's some of my recommendations for this new section. So next, we'll jump into poems. And for me personally, honestly, poems are my favorite. I love poems. And to me, poems are my favorite because I find them so interesting. You can think of Actually, before I jump to the exam technique, at least for the students here, think of poems as if you're, as if you're like digging for gold, right? Or if you're, I think, I'm not sure, maybe, back in Luna Park or any of these theme parks where they have some of those games where you can dig for something. It's a similar type of thing to me. So maybe the kids here probably think that I'm too old, for that. And but to me, honestly, poems are really fun, and I love poems. So to me, how I think of that is you've got your poem, and going through each of the lines or the stanzas, you can find what's the deeper meaning behind each one. So it's with my shovel, I'm trying to dig out what's the deeper meaning, or what ideas can I infer, and is there anything that's giving me any clues? Is there any symbolism are there any clues that are picking up? Even for this one, for example, the fish. Say for this one, you can see the structure of this. Poems are always, the poem is beautiful in the way where it's not only the words or the symbolism there, it's even structure. So for example, these sentences are they have their spacing gaps for a reason. It's maybe to represent waves or an ocean, for example. It's always representative of something, and that's the beauty of poems. To jump into the exam technique, poems are rarely ever literal in meaning. And what that means for the students' parents here is you'll rarely find a poem. You'll really rarely find a poem, especially in selective, where what they're saying is what they're actually trying to say. It's like, let me put it in this way: what they're putting on the paper or the words of the poem will not, or most of the times they won't reflect, the message that they're trying to convey to us as readers. So it's our role to break that apart. So imagine the poem is an onion, and and we're all of us, we're all chefs. We're all, Michelin star chefs, right? And it's our duty to peel back the layers of, the onion, and find out what's at the core. What's at the core of the onion? And that's the core of the onion, or in this case, the core of the poem is the message that the poet is trying to convey to us. That's what we're trying to figure out. What is it that the poet is saying to inform us of something? What message is the poet trying to pass on to us through writing the poem? These are some questions that you should be thinking about. Yeah, poems are rarely ever literal in meaning, and it's through textual analysis strategies where you can dissect metaphors and uncover symbolism to figure out what the poem actually means, right? We don't take things from face value. We have to find out, okay, what are some of the cracks? What are some of the gaps within the onion where we can peel it back? And these gaps or these cracks are oftentimes metaphors. For example, let's say let me give you guys like 2-3 examples of some very, very common metaphors, and you probably would have seen them in past poems as well. Let's say water, for example, a very, very, very common metaphor to symbolize flow, and that could be a reflection of life, or that can be a reflection or symbolic of the passing of time. So I've read a few poems about life. So it's more so about the life cycle of a person. For me and you here today, we're born, we become kids, and then we grow into teenagers, adults, and as the elderly. And for, say, that poem, water, the poem was talking about water, but what it's actually trying to say to me is about the humans and the passing of time. And let me give another example for mirrors. For example, I've read 3 or 4 poems that have used mirrors as a central motif or a recurring metaphor throughout the poem. And I remember vaguely one of them was about describing the aesthetics of a mirror. So if you read that, in face value, you'd think it's about a mirror, but it was actually a poem about self-reflection and using the mirror in a very, very clever way to symbolize that or reflect that, reflect that. So it's finding these sort of metaphors and symbolisms as your clues and your cue to peel back that layer and find the core of what they're actually trying to say. Look for obviously implicit meaning, metaphors, structural links to society and human experiences. So when I say society and human experiences, as I just mentioned, when you have something that links to maybe life, friends, family, love, for example, these are all human experiences. Oftentimes, as a general rule of thumb, poems will dive into those things. Aim to analyze the poem in around 3 minutes, but with 3 minutes, when it does come to your overall exam strategy, you can save time in other sections to spend a bit more time on analyzing the poem, to actually go through and dissect it, because skimming a poem will only require you to read it again, to then dissect it, and then that again wastes that first amount of time. Students often rush this section as the poem is often shorter than other texts and takes less time to read. Just because it takes less time to read and the length is shorter doesn't mean that it's easier. In my opinion, it's the hardest section, although the text is shorter than the other sections. So do not skim this section. Take your time to dissect. Take your time to peel back the layers of the onion to ensure that you have a clear idea of what the core is of the poem. And once you understand the core of the poem, then it'll make it a lot easier for you to connect the stems of the question to the text, and approaching that in a similar way to part 1 of reading that we went through at the start. So that's a little bit about poems, and if anyone has any questions, especially for poems, because I do understand they are, in my opinion, the most difficult question, but also, in my opinion, the most enjoyable section, please just let me know in the Q&A at the end of today. Again, I love poems, so you probably heard that from me already, 5-6 times, but they are really enjoyable if you see it as like a treasure hunt or peeling back an onion. It's trying to find clues to get to the core of something. So it's a bit of a brain teaser, but yeah, there's a lot of enjoyment out of that. And closed passages and summary statements, your second last question or section, it's essentially to give you an overview. It's an informative text, and obviously for English Academy students, you'll see some correlation between this part of the reading exam and what you're learning for informative writing, because each section or each paragraph for informative writing reflects a different idea or a different point. So that's one of the biggest things to keep in mind, is that because it's informative, every paragraph will always represent, or I can't say always, but in most cases, I haven't seen many that haven't followed this, will follow, each paragraph will have a distinctive idea. For example, if it's about outside my window, there's actually a lizard. So that's giving me inspiration for maybe if there's an informative piece on lizards, it could be, the introduction, or that first paragraph here would be about an introduction to lizards. The next one could be life cycle of lizards. The next one could be diet of lizards. The next one could be reproduction and how lizards reproduce. And the last one could be their habitat. To give you guys an idea, this section, because they use an informative piece, the biggest clue is that each section follows a distinctive idea. And what does that mean to you when you're answering the question? What that means to you, I'll start with closed passages. So closed passages is where you have a phrase that you have to fit into these gaps, but then you have summary statements, which are just very similar to closed passage, but now you're just finding which one summarizes or best summarizes any of these paragraphs. The idea of one of these answers should or must align with any of the main ideas of the informative writing piece that's here. So as you read through these texts, keep in the back of your mind, or what I want you to stick to the back of your mind is, what is it? Well, what's the one purpose, not two, the one purpose of each paragraph? And usually, general rule of thumb, the first one is introductory, the final one is in conclusion. Sometimes they might not have a conclusion, sometimes they might. And finding out what's the main idea of each paragraph. And that will greatly inform you of, say if there's a passage here, so one of these closed passage responses that is, maybe it's talking about, possibly about habitat, then you have an idea of, okay, which paragraph should this be in? And even if there's two gaps, at least you've narrowed it down to those two. So that's the approach that I would say is most effective for scanning through these closed passage or summary statement questions. Yep, Safa and Jack, hang on to these questions. We'll have a Q&A at the very end. So hang around to the very end and we'll open the floor to the questions. For approaching these, because you have 7 options and 7 options for 6 of these gaps here, I would like you to start with the easiest gap or the easiest summary first. And a tip from me is most of the time that is in the introduction or the conclusion, because they're the paragraphs that haven't gone into the details just yet. So if you identify an intro and there's a gap there, then you want to find the phrase that is the most summative. Usually that's the easiest gap. Start with the easiest ones so that you can narrow down your options, because if you approach it from gap A, B, C, D and do it in sequential order, if you do it in that way, what happens is that you might come across a more difficult one first, and that might get you stuck up. You might be stuck in trying to answer that. But logically, the first box or the first gap or the first summary that you do, that one is the most difficult because you have more answer options. But the final one, if you've already answered all of them and you have the final one left, then you're only answering between 2. So narrow it down. So use the narrow down strategy to avoid making early mistakes, because if you make an early mistake, you're likely to, that's 2 marks gone, because if it's in the wrong gap, then that means this one was supposed to be in another gap. So then you get both wrong. So narrow it down, start from the easiest one. Don't go top to bottom. Start from the easiest one and prioritize your approach by that. Aim to skim the text in 3 minutes, around 3 minutes. And again, putting the analysis hierarchy, remembering, poems up here and choose the extracts down here, closed passages around here as well. So you don't want to deeply analyze, and you're not uncovering symbolism or anything like that in the same way where you're approaching poems. You're scanning the text to pick out key ideas. Once you have the key idea, keep scanning. And that's all you need. You don't want to spend all the time trying to interpret it, because there's no deeper meaning to interpret as opposed to poems. You need to spend enough time to peel at the back of your mind what is the main idea of each paragraph, so that you can tie it down to when you're approaching these closed passages or these summary statements. So just to clarify again for everyone, it can be either closed passages or summary statements. So if you see the past papers in the computer testing platform, some of them will have closed passages, some of them will have summary statements, but they're all assessing the same thing from students. How well can students skim through a text and understand the main idea? Closed passages are arguably more difficult than summary statements, but it's assessing the same sort of approach or the same sort of thinking from the students. And yeah, of course, if anyone has any questions, remember, just hang on to them and we'll jump through them at the very end. Moving on to choose the extract. Very final section, 10 marks. It's obviously stated as 1 question, but it is 10 marks, so you can consider it as 10 questions. You have your 10 questions to choose which extracts approaches a certain question in a certain way, then your answer is choosing one of these 4 extracts here. So jumping through them. And before I jump into the exam techniques, I want to implore that each section will oftentimes will always obviously have a different purpose behind it. So they could be, maybe an informative extract or a creative extract, or the choose the extract section. Each extract will cover a different style of writing. So one of the extracts could be creative, one of them could be informative. It's very important to identify that first, and that will actually make it easier for you when answering the questions, because you can differentiate in your mind again through skimming it what's the main idea of each extract and what style of text is each extract as well. So that's something to keep in mind. And in addition to that, this section, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, obviously from us refining our exam technique, is you should actually aim for 30 seconds per extract and 30 seconds per question. So what that means is that's my personal preference, and obviously I understand students, you can have your own timing approach, because it does depend on what you're stronger at as well. So your timing strategy is also should be something that's tailored, but it's 30 seconds per extract and 30 seconds per question. This should be treated more so as more rapid fire. And a tip for me is, personally for me, I prefer to start the exam with this section and skim through the extracts with speed to actually accumulate my time. And if I can do that, then when it does come to the poem section, then it's sort of like a mental thing. I feel more confident when approaching it. So that's just my personal preference. I know some other students prefer to start with the poem section, for example, but it does depend on what you'd prefer. So I would suggest that you try that out yourself for what fits you the best, because it is an individual thing. But for me, I actually prefer to start with this section. Use reading and retention strategies to optimize your time to information retention ratio. So essentially what that means is you want to be able to pick up the key ideas as accurately as you can under your timed conditions. Skimming through these and understanding what's the main idea, what's happening, what's the key message, if that's applicable, or what's the key idea. Then as you skim through each of the extracts, it's very important to distinguish in your mind what are the key differences between each extract. That's very, very important. And the reason why that's very important is because each of these extracts will cover, or they will be associated with a shared theme. What that means is, for example, I've got a glass, I've got a cup, a mug here. And okay, let's say the theme was mug. Extract A could be, about how mugs were made. It's an informative. Another one could be about a story about an elderly woman who collected mugs. Extract C could be about, how mugs were invented, for example. And extract D could be about bringing a mug on an adventure, for example. So they're all centered around a main idea, but slightly different in their own purpose. So it's very important as you skim that you understand the key differences between the ideas. That's very, very important. Let me know if you guys can hear me. I'll open the chat once again. And if anyone can't hear me, please do let me know. You can hear me? Awesome. Thank you for that. Perfect. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you for letting me know. Awesome. I will pause this back up, and don't worry. I'll reopen the chat at the Q&A. So then I'll go through every question one by one. And obviously, if you aren't able to stay for longer, I'm more than happy to keep staying on to continue. But I would love to, obviously, if you aren't able to hop on, there will be a screen recording that I will share to everybody. But yeah, continuing on with the choose the extract section. For that, it is, as I've said already, it's differentiating those 4 extracts in your mind, because there is a shared theme. You need to be able to identify, okay, why is extract A different to the rest? Why is extract B different to the rest? And so on. And that's the most important thing. Then obviously going through each of these one by one. And if you can't answer one of them and you're stuck at that, flag it and move to the next one. I wouldn't stay stuck at one of them. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll open it up again, the chat. So just to let me know if you can't hear me. So if you can't hear me, let me know. And that's the choose the extract section. And moving on to, no worries. If you aren't able to stay around, obviously no obligation to hang around, but there'll be a recording there. There'll be a recording there for everybody. So I will just close off the chat just now. And as I mentioned earlier, so with our free resource bank, we have a few materials such as checklists. So obviously to supplement a lot of the things that I talked about today, and even for high school English students, we have a few question sets that I obviously have on my free resource bank. And this is for the wider community of parents and students. And it includes a bunch of vocab lists that we do keep sending out and putting through on our Facebook group. So the NL English Academy Facebook group, we will post these every single week, a resource every single week. But as we do, I always ensure that it's accessible on the website as well. So I can actually send that link to everybody here for now. And if you scroll down, you'll be able to instantly just click and download them and use them. And it's just for everybody to use and share. Moving on. So now we're just jumping into our Q&A. But obviously before we jump into the Q&A, obviously as of today, our term programs for NL English Academy for Term 1 2026 have opened for Year 3 to 10 OC Selective and High School English Acceleration. Just to keep in mind that our term programs are, students can only join by application only. And I actually personally hand review every single application. So there's a suite of responses, as well as reviewing your school report to see your performance, behaviorals, and everything like that, to see if you're obviously a good fit for our program. So our term programs are by application only, and not all students are obviously accepted into NL English Academy term programs, but we have opened our applications this morning actually for next year. And obviously that being said, our summer holiday programs, obviously for Year 4 to Year 6 intensive OC and selective English exam mastery, those are currently in at the moment, and obviously on a first in, first served basis. So I believe our Year 5 course is now on a waitlisted basis now as well. So we're not able to offer any more spots for Year 5. So Year 5 for 2026 Year 5, so current Year 4 students. That course, I believe, as of last week, it's now on a waitlist. But our Year 4 and Year 6 OC and Selective Mastery programs for Year 4 and Year 6 students next year, they have a few slots are remaining. But I believe as of now, we haven't opened up any more new Year 5 classes for the summer holidays. So I'm going to open the floor now to some Q&A. So I will stick around for some Q&A for everybody here. So I've opened the chat just now, and feel free to just jump through with a bunch of questions. And first one, are we given mouses for selective? For the testing centers that I've heard back from parents, yes, they used the mouse, but obviously every testing center is different. But from what I've heard from parents who I've spoken with, yes, there's a mouse. Narrow down technique, Jack. Let me go back for you. Great question. Narrow down technique, I'll explain it like this. So if you're going for, say, this gap here, you're trying to answer, okay, what's the summary of this paragraph, and you have 6 choices to choose from. If you're answering this gap first, your first gap that you answer, you've got 6 to choose from. it's significantly more difficult to choose an answer out of 6 options than it is to answer out of 2 options. Because say if you drag this into this gap here and you keep filling it out, when you get to the last one, you'll only have 2 to choose from. So that's what it means by narrowing down. Start from the easiest, summary or gap first, so that if you tackle the easier ones first, which are most likely always the intros and the conclusions, then when it does come to a harder gap or you're deciding between a few, then your answer options would have already narrowed down to maybe 2 or 3, as opposed to starting with 6. Because if you start with the hardest gap first and you have 6 options or 7 options here, then it makes it even harder for you. So that's the narrowing down technique. Are these changes made for trial tests? I'm not sure about anywhere else, but for NL English Academy, we've changed them. And we've integrated that to squeeze it into week 8 and week 9, because there hasn't been a formal notice, but these, obviously the reading exam changes, we've shuffled around our syllabus curriculum, obviously very proactively, so that we can teach this to our students in week 8 and week 9 and assess them in week 10 for that. So NL English Academy has made changes for this, but I can't say that for other places. Won't you only lose? So Lucas asks, won't you only? Hi Lucas, by the way. I hope you're doing well. Won't you only lose 1 mark, as there is 1 sentence you don't have to use in the closed passages? Yes and no. So if you've chosen, say, an incorrect gap, say you've chosen an incorrect answer to fit in this gap. So say, for example, if you see my mouse here, this gap here, you've put it into gap A, but it's supposed to be in gap F. Since this one's in gap A, then gap A is wrong. But then it was supposed to be in gap F. So therefore another phrase would have been in gap F. So therefore you've gotten 2 wrong. But the only sort of edge case is because you've got an extra one. If you've used the extra one to put into one of the gaps, then you wouldn't get 2 wrong. You'd only get 1 wrong. So that's the only case where you'd lose 1 mark, is if you used the one that's like the dummy answer. But if you use one of the answers that was supposed to be somewhere else, then you've lost 2. How much time would you suggest to do each section? That depends on your personal time strategy as well, because different students find different sections harder and easier, and your timing should depend on that. But for me personally, choose the extract. I would start with this, and I would spend 30 seconds per extract, 30 seconds per question. That's about 8 minutes. Then I would go to maybe the first section. I would go to the first section and spend 2.5 minutes per text to dive into it. And then for each question, you should go through them within 30 seconds or around then. I would say around then for me. But it does depend. Because for me, I prefer to say, a good analogy would be like, I would prefer to, it's like rapid fire, the scanning ones, the ones that require scanning. So for example, closed passages, summary statements, and choose the extract, they require us to scan and use our scanning skills. And scanning is an element of speed. So I prefer to save time through these sections to be able to delegate more time to poems, for example, which they'll definitely take more time to analyze the poem. So you would see, analyzing the poem in 3 minutes. So that's, personally for me, that's how I would structure it. Do you have to pay to enter the resource bank? No, it's completely free. Free resource bank is here for everybody. It's completely free. If you click the link and just scroll down, it's literally just there. Free for everybody. It's definitely not paid at all. It's not paid. Does all the types of reading come selective? Jisha, for that one, the only thing that could be different is for this section, you could either get closed passages or summary statements. As again mentioned, it's assessing a similar skill. It's assessing a similar skill, but you choose one or the other. So you can get either this or this one. You won't get both. So to answer your question, it's either or for these ones, but for the rest of the sections, you will. Is registering early for the test any advantage? I wouldn't say so, but I wouldn't say there's any. I wouldn't say there's anything, I guess, disadvantageous about registering early. But I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say there's any specific advantage, but I wouldn't say again that it'd be disadvantageous not to, if that makes sense. Is typing.com a good typing website? I'm not entirely sure about typing.com. I'm not too sure about it, but Monkey Type for me helps me a lot. Do you offer an online practice pack we could buy for reading practice? We don't offer packs, or obviously we don't offer packs, or I know other tutoring centers charge for like packs of material, but you can just use our free resource bank. There are some question sets there already, so you can just use them. How to memorize the vocabulary in an effective way? Great question. That's actually something I would love to talk about. So again, memorizing vocabulary, it's not as simple as reciting vocabulary and just memorizing the definitions. It's not about memorizing the definitions. If you're obviously understanding the word and its definition, you need to understand how it fits in context. So how do we do that? The best way to the best way to test if you actually understand a new vocabulary word is to write it down in a sentence. So use it in a sentence, and after you use it in a sentence, use it in another sentence in another context. So try to use it in different ways, and try to integrate it in different ways. It's not about memorizing vocabulary, but it's more about if you're fluent with vocabulary in the right context, then it's part of your it's in your backpack, and it'll be easier for you. But it's not about memorization, it's about applying it into different contexts. So Ishrat, for you, try to use it and write various sentences with that new word. That could help. Safa asks, what do you mean by don't start from the first gap, always start from the easiest? So always start from the easiest gap. That means obviously you have gap A, gap B, gap C, gap D, gap E, gap F. Don't start from gap A. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. I would look through all of these gaps first and find which one seems the easiest. Usually it could be in the introduction, or for this one, there's one in one of the later ones, or if there's one at the topic sentence or at the linking sentence. Try to find which one you instinctually know what the idea should be. For example, it's a little bit small to see here, but there's a gap. There's a gap here, 2 gaps here, but usually in body paragraphs, there's a topic sentence and a linking sentence. And if there's only one topic sentence out of the whole text, then you can try to look for one that's a topic sentence and do this gap first. So start from the easiest one. You don't have to start from gap A. You can start from gap E or D or C or whichever one, as long as you skim through here and find which one's the easiest. The same goes for summary statements, whichever one's the easiest. And another question is, I see a couple of questions going down. Let me just get to this. I'm not sure which question I was up to, but okay. So yeah, you're welcome to leave if you don't have any questions. And do you use a laptop or computer in OC and Selective? I believe it's a computer. And it's provided by them. Do we have online practice for reading? Obviously, for English Academy students, it's always during class as well. But with the online practice, we have obviously our free resource bank if you need some extra materials. And how do we know what is the easiest passage? Hadrian asks. So as I've explained for that one, looking out for summative sentences, intros and the conclusions and the topic sentences. Is the selective test online or on paper? The selective test is computer-based. What does retention mean? Retention means essentially retention is how well something sticks. So if you're retaining information, it's how well that information sticks in your mind. That's what retention means. NL English Academy provide unlimited writing prompts. In our free resource bank, we have a writing prompt bank as well here. So you will see some writing prompts here. You can access that. It's essentially for free. It's there for everybody. You can use it. It's split by a different writing style, so you can use that. How do we memorize vocab effectively, Jack? So as I've answered already, try to not only memorize the definition, but understand it in the right context. So after you learn a new word, write it down in different sentences in different contexts. What if you don't improve on your typing? So Krishna asks, if your writing skill or if your typing skills are lacking, then it can be quite a big risk when it comes to obviously your exam technique, because then naturally when typing you'd have to go back and fix up mistakes and incorrect spelling. It's like students might know how to spell a certain word, but they might just incorrectly get it wrong because of their typing skills. Or students who can type faster will have such a big advantage when it comes to time management, because they can write the same sentence in half the time, for example. So I would implore focusing on typing. Do you have any online practice and review options that can cater for distance students? So Sujay, NL English Academy is entirely online. So we have obviously our online, small class focus groups. So they do cater to distance students as well. We actually have interstate students too. How many options are there in selective for multiple choice questions? 4. Have the changes been made in the official selective practice tests that the DOE provides? Yes, they have. The ones that I've actually sourced are from the Department of Education, so they're on there. Is there any scope to save the writing in writing section or to make undo even in case it's deleted? I'm not entirely sure about in exam, but I would recommend to avoid obviously deleting and selecting the whole thing. But you can, because the exam platform is custom created from the government, it's hard to test. But you can definitely check that out on the testing website platform. And Krishna asks again, what if you are more comfortable writing on paper? Then there's no option. There's no option for you because they won't mark it if you write it on paper. It's a computer-based exam. So that means students are forced to acclimatize to typing. So I would take advantage of this and hone down your typing skills. Is there maths in selective? Yes, there is. And scrolling down, is the vocabulary section coming from the actual texts or is it just randomly chosen? So for this one, if you're referring to this section, there are gaps that you can you place the best fitting word in to fit into one of these gaps. So one of these four words will come from one of these words will come from the text itself. Shilpa asks again, can we get unlimited writing prompts? So it's on our free resource bank right here, Year 3 to 6 writing prompt bank. So you can get some writing prompts there. Do you find the main idea and stop reading the text? Depending on which section, your first section and the poem section, it's very different to close passage and choose the extract. When you're skimming through the informative style texts, you want to understand the main ideas through skimming and scanning, but through the poem and the first section with the dual MCQs, you need to dive deep and understand the center of what the text is trying to obviously show to the readers. That's finding the main ideas. You can refer back to the text if you want to. There's no designation to stop reading the text. How effective is ChatGPT for correcting writing? I wouldn't recommend ChatGPT to correct your writing. That's my personal opinion. What mark would you need to get in writing to be in the top 10%? It's a percentile base. So if you're in the top 10%, it's within the top 10% of students. So it's not a mark. but it's how you go in comparison to other students. But for NL English Academy, if you're, say, because the competition at NL English Academy is pretty, like it's pretty competitive at NL English Academy from the caliber of the students, I would say, because I think, Nishant, I think for the end of term exam, if you're, above, 18, 19 and above, that's actually, that's quite, good for NL English Academy, because we mark very harshly. So think of it not as a mark, think of it as how you go compared to everybody else. Say, for example, if you had an exam and everyone got 2 out of 100, say most people got 2 out of 100 and you got 3 out of 100, your mark is 3%, but you still came first. So you'd still be in the top 10%. So think about it like that. It's not based on your marks, it's how your marks sit compared to others. What subjects are there in selective? There are obviously your reading, writing, maths, and thinking skills. NL English Academy, so Krishna, NL English Academy is entirely online. So I will put the website here. NL English Academy is entirely online. And no problems. Thank you, Farah. Thank you for joining. And if you have any lasting questions, please drop them in the chat. Websites that can improve my spelling and decrease my grammatical errors. MonkeyType. MonkeyType is a good website to test your typing skills. That's really good. What high school did I go to and what was my writing task? I went to North Sydney Boys High School. So I was a previous student of North Sydney Boys High School. Obviously, they're first in New South Wales. And by the end of North Sydney Boys, I was top 3 within North Sydney Boys. So I was near the top of Australia for English. My writing task when it was selective, I had a creative writing piece. It was a prompt. It was 3 different doors. And it was a creative writing piece based on an image. Do your resources also have an outline or structure for each writing type? So Veronica, yes, there's a checklist for each of these. So you can check out the checklists. I would recommend to just look through the resource bank, go through each one, see how they all are. And there's a lot of resources there actually. There's informative writing checklist, persuasive writing checklist, creative writing checklist. It's essentially, a lot of the things from NL English Academy classes, but simplified and put into, say, a checklist, for example, here. Suraj, typing games are useful, I would say. And Ishrat's asking, Nelson, it would be great if you elaborate the different types of writing techniques. The different writing techniques depend, say, if it's creative, persuasive, discussion, or informative. There's very, very different styles. It'll be a lot to cover, but creative, obviously, symbolism, if you've got your motifs, extended metaphors, etc. Persuasives, ethos, logos, pathos, personal anecdotes, stylistic techniques, and your structural techniques. So the way you structure sentences and your tonality is very important. Informative is keeping your passive and balanced tonality. That's one of the most important techniques when it comes to informative. So that's a bit of a rundown. Christian is asking, can you write it on paper and hand it to the judges? No. It's computer-based. So once you start the exam, there's a submission box on the computer-based testing platform. So once you finish writing, it will automatically submit, and it's submitted through the computer. They will not accept the writing if you write it on paper and hand it to them. They won't accept it. And I think, obviously, so Pratika's asking, is there any word limit for the writing exam? There is no word limit. But there is no word limit. Where can we get practice papers for word choice? So it'll be on the Department of Education website for that portal. And Iman is asking, how come NL English Academy is online and not an actual school, and how do you join? So NL English Academy is entirely based online, and we have students all across New South Wales and interstate as well. And obviously it's suitable quite well because, as you may already know, the exams are computer based, and we are an online academy. Remnik, no problems. It was a pleasure having you here today. And Christian is asking, what is the most important thing in the writing exam? It's understanding the purpose of what the question is actually asking you to do. Because if the writing task is asking you to write a narrative and you write a persuasive, then it's the wrong purpose. So really understanding what is the question asking you to do and following that closely. That's very important. So LS asks, what about recommended word count as a guide? I would recommend aim for 300, 400 words in the 30 minutes. That's my aim. I would aim for around there. But if you can type, I would always suggest, because that's based off handwriting, but now it's computer based. If you improve the speed of your typing, you can obviously increase the number of words you write and increase the depth in your writing. There's a lot of benefits to that, because typing, if you get your typing skills obviously optimal, then it's a huge advantage when it comes to your computer-based strategy. Veronica is asking, do you also cater to tutoring high school and after school selective school test is over? Yes, all the way up to year 12 actually. So after selective, our year 6 term 2 to year 6 term 4 is a bridging course actually for high school English with essay writing and short answer questions and analytical writing. 7 to 10 is textual analysis, short answer questions, essays, etc. And 11 and 12 are it's by inquiry only. So we currently, for year 11 and year 12, we only have a North Sydney boys cohort for year 11 and year 12, because obviously for HSC they have different schools have specific text types, so groups must be in the same school. So we cover all the way to year 12. And I think we are running about over time, but just to obviously for the last remaining ones here for us here in the call, just a final obviously wrap up. Our term programs are by application only. They are by application only, and we do select students to join. So after your application, we do select students to join. And obviously with our summer holiday intensive programs, they are obviously open in January if you are interested. But obviously with that aside, I do hope that this masterclass has been informative for all of the parents and students here today. I know there's a lot of chatter in the chat from all of the kids, which is actually good, that everyone's sticking around and staying engaged. So I hope that this masterclass has been informative. And again, I have these masterclasses as part of NL English Academy every single term. And if anyone has any questions, I will post a recording to the discussion groups. And if you have any questions, you can jot them down there. So thank you all for your attendance. And I hope that this masterclass has been informative to everybody. And I hope everybody has a lovely rest of their Sunday. So thank you so much, everybody, and take care and good luck. So take care, everybody. Thank you very much and have a lovely weekend ahead. So thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.